Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both of you for being here. I think the frustration that you're hearing from us was very accurately described by both Chairman Menendez and Ranking Member Risch, and that is that when we were told these were going to be the toughest sanctions ever on a country, and they were going to have certain impacts, and we have not seen the full impact that was described to us. And so I think we're anxious to know what more we can do, what more the administration can do to make these sanctions even tougher, to make it even harder for Russia to operate. And one of the things you said, Secretary Rosenberg, was the fact that there are European colleagues who may be better positioned for certain banks or certain efforts because of where they're located. I would just point out, as I know you're aware, that it's often if the United States takes a lead, that helps prompt our allies, our European colleagues, to follow that. So I hope we are continuing to think about that. And I wonder if you talked about the additional ways that we need to apply pressure. I wonder if you could talk about what the plan is to do that to the extent that you can publicly. And then I wanted to follow up on the energy issue because, as Senator Menendez mentioned, and the news this morning was about the sabotage of the pipeline. Maybe you could start with this, Ambassador O'Brien. That appears, the suggestion is that it's Russia sabotaging the gas pipeline. Do we have any idea what the impact of that's going to be and how that's being mitigated?
Thank you, Senator. It's apparently sabotage. The Danes and others are going to investigate. We have to see the result of the investigation. They'll mitigate the environmental damage. Neither pipeline's delivering all that much energy at the moment, so it won't affect that. But we'll have to evaluate the status going forward. And we've promised support for the European efforts to look into what's happening.
And what are the other ways that we're hoping to apply pressure, increase the impact of the sanctions for both of you, really, as we think about going forward?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. To go back to where you began your comments, this is the largest sanctions program that the United States has undertaken, along with other counterparts, in the scope and scale, the size of the institutions, the size of the economy, the international coalition that has brought this forward. And I appreciate the point you're making that Russia, what we are seeing in the drift back up of some of the economic indicators, that is what it looks like when Russia has had to burn through its fiscal buffers in order to create a veil of management or to seek to try and telegraph stability here. The draconian capital controls that they've put in place, they've spent over $100 billion in fiscal stimulus this year.
And I appreciate that, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but my question is really more, what are we doing to respond to that? Recognizing that Russia's taking these measures to try and keep their economy as stable as possible and to reassure their public, what are we doing to make sure they're not successful at that?
I think it's critical to take the long view here and play a long game. What they're doing is unsustainable. So we must match the intensity of our prior efforts and continue on with this. And that means applying pressure with our own additional sanctions and working with colleagues in other jurisdictions to match ours. You made a very good point about leading by example when it comes to implementation of sanctions. The same is true when it comes to enforcement. And when the United States takes enforcement actions, that is also a critical leadership function, not just on substance, but also in form and the methodology of how to go about bringing enforcement actions that our partners can and will follow the United States in order to apply this pressure.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the point about the long game. The frustration is, as we know, that while we're playing the long game, Ukrainians are dying. And so anything we can do to speed up these efforts, I think, are important. Ambassador O'Brien, a final question, because I'm almost out of time. What are we doing to get countries like India, who ought to be all in here, in terms of being willing to join this effort against Russia? What are we doing to try and get them to work with us more closely?
Thank you, Senator. We work intensively with all the key governments, including India. India obviously has a long-term special relationship with Russia. This is a time for India to reconsider where it's positioning itself geopolitically. So it's a part of an all-of-government approach with them. Indian companies understand that their access to the global financial system depends upon them complying with our sanctions. And we've made that point very clear. Deputy Secretary Ariyama was just in India. You were on that trip? No. So we were working at a high level consistently with India, with other countries. And just as one example of how this constantly evolves, Turkey had begun accepting an alternative Russian payment system. This is very troubling, and I think largely through a number of communications, both privately and more publicly, particularly by the Treasury, we made clear that we were concerned about this. We designated some of the Russian officials involved in the payment system, and now the government has instructed all Turkish banks to back out of it. That's a way in which we're stopping Russia from insulating itself, and it exposes them to further sanctions and to more enforcement. So this happens on an ongoing basis.
Thank you.